Sandeep Aneja started Kaizenvest with a vision to solve the challenges facing the future of learning and work. The asset manager believes that learning is the catalyst for a better world and has identified the three key challenges as access, quality and relevance. Sandeep Aneja, company founder and managing director, joins us now. Sandeep, welcome. Tell us about Kaizenvest and how you saw a gap that needed to be filled here.
Kaizenvest today is, for a lot of people, the leading asset management firm in Asia and Sub-Saharan Africa that works across all segments of education. And we try to bridge gaps in access and quality primarily, and hope to bridge gaps in relevance, which I can explain to you in a little bit. We do so through instruments in private equity and private credit, mostly private equity in Asia and private credit in Sub-Saharan Africa.
So you mentioned that you're working in those areas in Southeast Asia, Sub-Saharan Africa. Why particularly those regions?
When I got gripped with the idea of doing something meaningful, and education came top of my mind because as a father, that was a big deal for me as a person. And I had seen the catalytic role education had played in my own success, I would say, in some manner. So I could really imagine that education could be a good catalyst to, first of all, change a human being and change work, change the planet itself. So I started off about 12 years ago to set up an education fund to invest in India, which is where I originally come from. And then quickly we saw demand coming at us from Southeast Asia because we were the only sort of game in town. And that helped us realize that we should grow our presence in Southeast Asia. And we did that successfully over the last 5-6 years. And over the last 2 years, we had been learning a lot of lessons in financial inclusion in India and other markets in Indonesia. And those lessons were resonating with a lot of entrepreneurs in education in Sub-Saharan Africa. And we saw financial inclusion as a method of bringing access to education, really good quality, affordable education at the bottom of the pyramid.
You're exposed to some incredible innovation and some very smart entrepreneurs. What's your view on the future of learning?
So simple things, right? The future of learning is a little bit present in front of us right now. It is not that far off. A lot of the people, the next generation, the generation after that are learning, are much more desirous of controlling their own learning environment, what they learn. They don't necessarily need to aspire to be a doctor, a lawyer, engineer, a journalist, or those traditional roles that we, at least I know, I grew up aspiring to be. They can aspire to be very different things. And those different roles, from graphic designer to somebody that's an influencer in social media and multiple others, which I cannot even today imagine, those roles didn't exist and don't exist, and curriculum to teach towards those do not exist. So learner centricity is at the core of learning today. This typical education system, which is based on a systematic approach to time-limited delivery of learning, is changing. It's much more about anytime, anywhere, learner-centric, not sage on stage pedagogical framework. Is much more around, teach to my strength, don't necessarily teach to my weaknesses, because we've learned that very, very well over the last 10, 20 years, that if you teach a human being to their strengths, instead of teaching to their weaknesses, you enable their weaknesses to reduce. And the very opposite occurs if you teach to their weaknesses, which has been the standard for a lot of the educational systems globally for many years now. So it's a remarkable shift, remarkable learning of how human beings learn, behave, grow. And that's also related to the jobs that are existing today and coming to being.
In your mind, is it technology or is it finance or perhaps a combination of both that will best solve the learning problems that we face today?
It is a combination of, you hit the nail on the head, actually. It is really possible to use technology to bring learning to a greater, wider variety of people. But if you cannot change the price point, if you cannot make it more affordable, if you cannot make it more piecemeal, then the effect could be a little bit more dwarfed. But if you could bring all three elements together, the sweet spot right in the center of those three circles, if you imagine a Venn diagram, right in the middle, that sweet spot is super transformative. Education, technology, and finance coming together to bring a new kind of education, a better quality, more accountable education to people. That's super possible.
Well, yeah, is it possible in our lifetimes to make learning accessible for everyone?
It is entirely possible, and it should be. In fact, we are almost there. Uh, the gross enrollment ratios when first started the fund for much of Asia in higher education were mid-teens. They were not even touching 20s. Now they're beyond 20s. So there's been a 10% increase, with 10 on a basis of 15 over the last 10 years. That's remarkable improvement in gross enrollment ratios for higher education. And a lot of primary education in multiple countries in emerging Asia and Africa were below 50%, 30%. Now those numbers have crossed the 50% benchmark, which is pretty remarkable as well. So we think that universal education is super possible. And with the growing emphasis and the rising middle class across all these markets, and hopefully there'll be peace across these regions as well, so we can really benefit from the opportunity that's been created by slightly better wealth distribution than existed a while back, 10 years, 20 years back.
Well, then is the capital that's required to make this happen actually available?
Therein lies the challenge. There are definitely three types of investors actually that are targeting this space. One are super return seeking investors who are possibly likely to build aggregated entities which run multiple schools, possibly international schools or colleges across various markets. They are serving a very niche purpose. The second type investors are impact investors, and they often are led by the DFIs, the developmental financial institutions, such as the IFC, BII from UK, and FMO from Netherlands, and multiple others, and Asian Development Bank in Asia, etc. Many of those institutions have limited capital, of course, because they have budgets to deal with. And education today has a significant challenge that it has to compete with the darling of everybody, which is climate. So there is often a budgetary issue when it comes to impact investors, and a lot of the impact investors, maybe rightfully so, are prioritizing climate. That is an emergent need, a more visible need. What I use an example is if climate change has a visible sign, that's a burning forest or a tsunami or something of some natural disaster, education doesn't show up, or the lack of it doesn't show up in a natural disaster format. So it's really hard to sell education or the need for it to governments and to policymakers very effectively or very easily. So that's the second type of investors. The third type, of course, are philanthropic and strategic partners who are still there, and they are very much involved in driving what education needs to be. And that source of capital is strengthened, is stoic, is present. So we definitely benefit from that. But we would love to see more impact capital coming back to education, because unless you can tell people what is climate change, why would they care?